It's beautiful, it's epic, it's gonna take 1,000 years to make. It's
Dreamquest.
Every official Sega Dreamcast game ever released, in release order.
Brothers and sisters, please join me for part 2.
It's the year that Manchester United won the fabled treble, and it's also the year that one of Prince's biggest hits finally lost a little bit of its impact, 1999. The legendary Sega Saturn, probably my all-time favourite games console, was to all intents and purposes dead. The PS1 was still going strong, of course, though technologically speaking, it was definitely showing its age. It was also clear, despite having some of the greatest games of all time on its roster, that the N64 was a relative failure, at least from a sales point of view, and hadn't managed to mount a serious challenge to Sony's runaway juggernaut. The PC was bathing in the light of the great graphics card boom of the late 90s, and the visuals presented in many of its big releases like Unreal and Half-Life were streets ahead of the competition. The PC had been hands down the most powerful platform for a couple of years at this point, but not any longer. The Sega Dreamcast had launched a couple of months earlier in Japan, and at least some of its games had demonstrated its incredible graphics capabilities. But despite some excellent games, the response in Japan was somewhat muted. The new console was still around 9 months away from release in the West, and the launch lineup would be far, far stronger by the time it did. As for me, well, in the meantime, I played whatever the N64 still had to offer, and I pined for the arrival of the fabled Dreamcast. The anticipation was building, especially if, like me, you've been a big Sega Saturn fan. The official Saturn magazine had wrapped up a couple of months earlier with this issue, featuring a Dreamcast logo on the cover and lots of Dreamcast coverage inside. Us loyal Sega fans were crossing over to the dark side of the moon at this point. It would almost be a year until we saw another official magazine, in the UK at least. But what about Japan? Well, in early 1999, Dreamcast games began to arrive thick and fast. There were some great games, and there were some crap games.
And I will show them all to you now.
Sengoku Turb. One of the delights of the Dreamcast is all the mental Japanese exclusive stuff you can get on there. I don't speak or read Japanese. The arcade stuff is absolutely fine, of course, generally speaking, because you don't need to know Japanese in order to drive or smash people in the face. But all the visual novels and RPGs are a bit of a challenge, which leads us nicely to my first game. Sengoku Turb is an action RPG, kind of. There's been a little bit of translation work done on this game, so I'm going to steal the fruits of their labour in order to tell you a bit about it. This is the planet of Rayon, or Ryon. Its beautiful emerald green plains are in fact in a constant state of war between the two major citizens, cats and sheep. You play a young outsider called Gino, who aligns herself with the cats and sets out to destroy the sheep menace. As we all know, sheep are absolute cunts. The game is actually a 3D remake of an earlier shareware PC-98 title of the same name, developed by the group
Bio 100%!
The characters are designed by Yoko Kuroyanagi, one of the main designers behind the Tamagotchi series of virtual pets, which were massively popular, of course, in the mid to late 90s. So, this game is mad. Basically, it's an action RPG kind of. You appear in a battlefield and you have to kill all the enemies. It has awkward, highly simplistic controls, and the story of course doesn't make much sense at all if you don't speak Japanese, and it probably doesn't make much sense if you do, to be honest. But even then, the whole thing is so bonkers that I actually found it pretty diverting for an hour or two. I quite enjoyed whacking things on the head, and the art style is very novel. If you can actually understand what's going on, I bet it's a damn good time. It received somewhat mixed reviews. It got 80 from Dreamcast magazine in Japan, it got 89 from Darimaga, also in Japan, and it got a 42 from Gamers Republic, but that was in the US. So, make up your own minds and give it a whirl by all means. It's certainly very unique. Okay, this is the first, inverted commas, proper JRPG for the Dreamcast, and it kinda shows, to be honest. It reminds me in some ways of Mystaria, an early RPG on the Sega Saturn, not because of the game itself so much, as the sense of being a little bit half-baked and kind of nascent. It feels to me like an RPG made by a company that's just feeling their way through things with this brand new hardware, and one that hasn't quite got to grips with it yet. We'd see some truly great RPGs in Grandia 2 and Skies of Arcadia a little later in the short life of the Dreamcast, and this one definitely falls away short of those two epics. That being said, there's quite a bit of stuff to like here, and at this stage of the Dreamcast's life, I'm sure you would have been pretty happy with this if you were a JRPG fan. Anyway, Evolution is a dungeon-crawling game that follows the adventures of Mag Launcher. Yes, Mag Launcher. He and his companions use psi-frames, technology discovered in ancient ruins. These psi-frames are sought after by adventurers who explore caverns to find vast amounts of treasure. The story follows 3 such treasure-hunting friends, one of which is kidnapped by the very naughty Prince Eugene. He believes the girl, called Linear, yes, Linear, is in fact a device called Evolution. a device able to grant him ultimate power. This game features non-random battles. You're whisked away to the battle screen only when you come into contact with an enemy on the map. The battle system itself is very ordinary from what I could tell, but there's nothing wrong with it per se. It certainly doesn't stand out from the crowd like Grandia 2's or anything, but it's perfectly serviceable. I have to say there's some lovely music in this game. The graphics are okay, considering we're still in the PS1 N64 era really. They're quite impressive, and it also has a thoroughly anime vibe, if not terribly appealing main characters. This game had a mixed reception at the time. Famitsu gave it 32 out of 40, while most Western reviewers gave it kinda 6s and 7s. It's no classic in my book, but I'm sure it has its fans, and those hungry JRPG fans would have found plenty of enjoyment here. I think it got a sequel as well, of course. We'll be looking at that one in about 150 years' time. So there. Sega Rally 2. I have a confession to make. I've never really gotten along with this game. I loved, and I mean loved, the original game, both at the arcades and on the Saturn. In fact, it's hands down my favourite racing game of all time. I would argue that that game is basically perfect. What it sets out to do, it does flawlessly. I love the music, I love the vibe, I love the feel. A 13-year-old me was very excited for the sequel, and I couldn't wait to see what it looked like on Sega's maniacally powerful Model 3 arcade hardware. And as with Virtua Fighter 3, it did indeed look absolutely amazing, but when I came to play it, I found it to be fun, but quite a lot more twitchy and arcadey feeling than the original, and it just kind of baffled me a little bit, really. I didn't get out to the arcade a great deal as a kid, as there wasn't one close to my home, and I've never really had the opportunity to sit down and play it for enough time to really get to know the game. When the time came to look back on this Dreamcast port, I thought I should go back to the original and give it a proper go. Unlike the early Virtua Fighter games, I don't have a PCB for this one, but fortunately the Supermodel emulator has come on leaps and bounds since I first tried it like 10 years ago or so now, and Sega Rally 2 looks almost flawless. I sat down, played it for a good couple of hours, and now I can pretty confidently say that this is absolutely a great game. It moves at a silky 60 FPS, and the graphics are just insane for 1998. I mean, this thing holds up well today. What about the handling? Well, it plays wonderfully when you practice with it a bit, but it is still rather more arcadey than the original, and I still prefer the handling in Sega Rally 1. This is totally a subjective thing though. They are both immaculate Sega arcade racers, with surprisingly different handling models, and that's all you can really say. Saying you prefer one over the other is akin to saying you prefer football over rugby, or tea to coffee. You just can't say in good conscience that one is better than the other. You just have your own preference. This Dreamcast version though, this does have several objective problems unfortunately. The biggest one is the highly inconsistent frame rate, which, being double buffered rather than unlocked, sees the game dropping from 60 all the way down to 30 FPS very frequently. Often it has the effect of making you feel like you're slowing down and speeding up, which makes it very hard to tell what's going on, particularly when, you're trying to turn corners. When coupled with the already quite twitchy handling of this game, at times it feels like I'm driving a slot car that's come away from its slot. That's why in these clips I'm driving like Mr. Magoo on his way home from a blood donation. Graphically, it's a little bit of a downgrade too, particularly in the colour and lighting department. It has a rather drab appearance compared to the arcade original, seen here in its emulated form. It's true that this looked amazing for a home console in 1999, but many were hoping for an essentially perfect arcade port, and we didn't get one. Sega Rally 2 was one of the first Sega Dreamcast titles to be announced, and alongside Virtua Fighter 3 TB was demoed by Sega with the aim of proving that the Dreamcast could match and exceed the Model 3 board's capabilities, despite only costing a fraction of the price to produce. Its early announcement, however, led to the game being developed in tandem with the hardware, leading to an arguably rushed product that does not fully take advantage of the system's capabilities.
Addendum.
I discovered a few years ago that there was in fact a 30 FPS lock code for this game, but I've never really got around to trying it for some reason. Well, I did give it a whirl this time around, and it does improve the experience quite a bit. You now have a consistent, much more flowing experience and can actually begin to get into the game rather than battling with the frame rate. Why this wasn't the default mode of the game, I do not know, but it absolutely should have been. Perhaps the developers just didn't want to draw such a clear dividing line between this and the Model 3 version. There is also a 60 FPS cheat code, but unfortunately it strips away so much detail that it just looks kinda poo. So I stick with 30 FPS. With that mode engaged, I can say that yes, this is most definitely a good game, taking on its own merits. I still like the original a little bit better, but yeah, the tunes are awesome, the graphics, even though they were downgraded from the arcade, was still very impressive for a home console in '99, and the handling is not entirely my cup of tea, but it's still a damn good time. The 10-year career mode is a nice addition and helps to round out the package, an improvement on the Virtua Fighter 3 port in this department at least. So what have we learned here? Well, unlike the Dreamcast port of Virtua Fighter 3, this one is actually a little bit inadequate in my opinion, even though the 30 FPS lock does help it a lot. Whether you love the arcade version of Sega Rally 2 or not, this one falls short of it graphically, particularly in the frame rate department. And most importantly, without entering a special code at the title screen, the frame rate has a knock-on effect on the gameplay. All that being said, there is a great game underneath these problems, and evidently they didn't cause people too many issues at the time, as the Dreamcast port was received positively. As positively as Virtua Fighter 3 in fact, which doesn't really make sense given the relative quality of each port. Anyway, it received a very good 83% rating based on a whopping 46 reviews.
Medium right, medium left. Oh no! 100, medium left. 50, plus. Medium right. 500, medium right. Game over, yeah!
Puppin Music. This is a rhythm game developed by Konami, would you believe, despite looking like it cost about 15 quid and took about 15 minutes to make. This game originally ran on the Bimani DJ Main hardware arcade system, which was also used for Beatmania, and it was a big hit in arcades, so naturally Konami wanted to port it to home consoles. You're supposed to have this funny little peripheral for your Dreamcast in order to play it properly, and needless to say, I don't have one. I tried with the joypad, but I just found the game so visually and orally unappealing that I didn't last very long. I do apologise. It received 72% based on 9 reviews, so I guess it can't be without its merits.
In the 19th century, people are strong believers of superstition and legend. Adventurers seek the world for fortune, glory, and a legendary treasure which has the power to make dreams come true. That treasure is known as the Powerstone.
A Dreamcast classic here and one of the big early hits, both in the West and in Japan. Capcom was a hugely important developer for Sega in both the Saturn and Dreamcast eras, releasing absolutely reams of classic games for Sega's ill-fated consoles. We will see many of those games as we continue on our quest. Powerstone is a 3D fighting game originally developed by Capcom for the Sega Naomi arcade hardware in 1999 and soon ported over to the Dreamcast. Unlike the Sega Model 3 ports, which were hampered a bit by the vast differences between the two platforms, the Sega Naomi and the Dreamcast are almost identical, and so too are the ports. This was very good news indeed, and we would see many excellent arcade games coming home to Dreamcast in essentially perfect form.
Challenge 1. Are you ready? Challenge 1. Are you ready? Action!
Set in the 19th century, strong believers of legends, myths, and superstitions search for fame, fortune, and glory. One legend, above all, is sought after by many, a treasure which can make any dream come true. Believers from all over the world set out to search for this treasure and are forced to fight against one another in pursuit of the legendary Powerstone. The game is a two-player top-down fighting game where players can use special attacks and utilise objects to beat their opponents. The levels also spawn Power Stones, which can significantly boost the player's performance if collected. What can I say about this one? The environments are beautiful, the characters are colourful and memorable, the action is frantic yet calculated. It's ace, and if you played it with more than one player, it was even better. This game received very positive reviews, having an 86% rating on Sega Retro based on 39 reviews, and is a quite legendary game in the Dreamcast canon. If you haven't played it, go and do it now. Aerowings. Known as Aero Dancing in Japan, this one was developed by CRI Middleware, also responsible for various Sega arcade ports for the Mega Drive, including Galaxy Force 2, and the Saturn, including Virtua on Cyber Troopers. This one struck me immediately with its really cool tunes and actually really quite impressive 3D graphics and sense of scale. The environments look really cool in that turn-of-the-century arcadey way, and there's quite a bit of variety to them too. This is a stunt simulation flight game as opposed to Konami's Air Force Delta's combat-based take. I suppose you could say it's a bit like Pilot Wings in a way. You start off with some simplest training missions where you'll enjoy some cool vintage dance music and get shouted at by a very shouty American man.
Turn right, pull the control stick and take off. Go! Pull in landing gears. Flaps up, flaps down. Hey, not bad.
I guess he's alright actually.
Hey, are you out of your mind?
What a fucking dick. You will learn how to do barrel rolls, vertical cupids, Immelmans, figure eights, close formation flying, and loads of other hair-raising, knuckle-whitening manoeuvres. This game does require quite a bit of investment to get good at it, and therefore I failed horribly. But I certainly did enjoy what I did play, and I'm going to emphasise the graphics in this game. They just weep with that late 90s slick arcade style-y. Weirdly, I find them somewhat reminiscent of Ridge Racer Type 4. Only a bit more sophisticated, with their simplistic but stylized forms and cool muted tones. Something about this game just looks damn cool. Yeah.
Jet altitude is getting low. Pull back the control stick to ascend. Check target. Look to your right.
This received quite lukewarm reviews in the West, although IGN did give it an 8 back in the day, but I think that's a little bit unfair personally, and if this is your bag, then I would definitely recommend giving it a try. Psychic Force 2012. One of the other really nice things about this insane, pointless endeavour that I've undertaken is that I have an excuse to play games that always intrigued me, but that I've never actually got around to playing for one reason or another. This is one such game. It had a reasonably high profile early on in the Dreamcast's short life and had quite a bit of magazine coverage. Believe it or not, anime stuff was still somewhat novel and exotic to many of us in the late 90s. I was well into Ghost in the Shell and Akira back in those days, and this game had spiky blonde hair and gigantic eyes to spare.
そんなに邪険にすることはねえだろう。この俺様が相手してやろうってのによ。
Ready, go!
なるんだよ。
Ready, go!
For some reason, I don't really understand why, it never had quite enough of a draw to make me part with my pocket money back in those days, and even in the intervening years I've never actually sat down and given it a try. Until now.
So what is it?
Well, Kat, this is a one-on-one fighting game, with a bit of a difference. You take the role of a psychica. Yes, that's a real word. Someone imbued with paranormal abilities such as flight and telekinetic projection of energy and solid objects. In time-honoured tradition, your job is to batter people about the head and face. Each fight takes place in a clear cube suspended in mid-air, and characters float around inside until they are knocked out, at which point they crash to the floor or are blasted out of the cube as it shatters with the force of the final blow. A little bit like fighting vipers. As you hover, float and dash through the air, you can come in close for some traditional combo-based punch and kick action, or remain distant and fire a volley of projectiles. It takes quite a bit of figuring out if you're coming from a more traditional 3D fighting game, of course, but its systems actually work very well, I think, and there's quite a bit of depth here too. The voice acting's really cool, actually, and this helps the story mode no end. It hasn't been dubbed, it's in its original Japanese with subs, which many of us prefer, and it's genuinely quite engaging stuff in that silly Japanese anime way. And that is quite unusual to this day for a fighting game story mode, in my humble opinion.
二人とも無事でいて。
お前か。軍についてこそこそ嗅ぎ回っているのは。
私、バーンとエミリオを探しているの。何か知っていたら教えて。
そんなに知りたければ、己の力で聞き出すんだな。
Ready, go!
死にな、クズが。
This, added to the stylized art design, cool stages and unique gameplay, makes for a very cool retro-ish gaming experience, in my opinion. Again, it only got decent review scores back in the day, 7 out of 10 from IGN, but this is definitely a game that's aged pretty well in my book. It has a number of unique features that really make it stand out from the crowd, and I would say it's well worth giving a try. Mahjong II Special. Alright, it's Japanesey time again. This game was originally released on the Saturn and was enhanced for the Dreamcast. It allows you to play Mahjong against 23 famous historical and fictional figures, including Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Honest Abe Lincoln, Joan of Arc, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. This remake includes full 3D graphics, kind of, and voice clips for each character. Honest Abe.
私が勝ったら
What the
ドルでい
fuck?
ただきたい。
Alright. Yeah, we'll have one of those there. No fucking clue what's going on. I can't really comment on how good a game this is because I can't play Mahjong for shit, let alone when it's all in Japanese. But I certainly dig its weirdness and its music. It received fairly middling reviews even in Japan. Famitsu gave it 60%. Needless to say, it was never released in the West. But where else in modern gaming can you find a spinning 3D rendered Abraham Lincoln face? Puyo Puyo 4. Wahey! An English translated game, finally. Puyo Puyo is a really cool puzzle game that I've never really figured out how to play properly, but that I dig all the same. This is the first Puyo Puyo game to be released after Sega became the owner of the IP. And yes, its story mode is now fully translated to English thanks to some intrepid and awesome fans, so I can now tell you a bit about it. The Dark Prince has started a circus which Arl, Nadja and Carbuncle decide to attend. For one of his magic tricks, he makes Carbuncle disappear. While entertaining at first, the show concludes with Carbuncle still nowhere to be found. Thus, Arl conducts a search for him, battling familiar opponents along the way.
Super Dynamic Ocha Bomba!
As I said earlier, I've never been good at Puyo Puyo games, but I do enjoy it, up until the point where I get absolutely mashed into the ground by the AI. From what I've read, fans criticise the slower gameplay of this particular edition of Puyo Puyo and the plot holes in the story. Well, not quite sure why they were looking for a well-balanced story in a Dreamcast puzzle game, but there you go. Sega Retro gave it an average of 70% based on 9 contemporary reviews, so it didn't exactly set the world on fire, but if you're a fan of Puyo Puyo, of course, you will give it a whirl. Monaco Grand Prix Racing Simulation. Is this the most Dreamcasty music you've ever heard? This one lacked an official license, and it kind of brings back fond memories of games like Euro Club Soccer on the old Mega Drive, where you had all these sound-alike names all over the place that we all used to find highly amusing back in the day. The graphics here are meh. I also can't turn corners on this one. I clearly need more practice. This is not a great racing game, but it's not bad by any means. Early on in the Dreamcast life, I think you would have been fairly pleased with this one.
Checkpoint!
F1.
Somewhat interestingly, this game had more regional variations than Father Christmas.
Kris Kringle, Sinterklaas, Père Noël, Babo Natale, Père Nicole, Topo Gigio.
Why is this? Well, it's a sequel to the 1997 PC game F1 Racing Simulation, later known as Racing Simulation 1. However, it lacks the FIA license from its predecessor. Instead, the game is licensed by the Automobile Club de Monaco, meaning only the Monaco Grand Prix is officially licensed. As a result, in Japan and mainland Europe, it's known as Monaco Grand Prix Racing Simulation 2, save for the UK, there's always one, which knows the game as Racing Simulation Monaco Grand Prix, and Germany, which knows it as Racing Simulation 2. In the Americas, it is simply Monaco Grand Prix. That was really important, and I hope you've all made notes. There will be a test later on. Anyway, what about the game itself? Well, it's F1. It has 17 different courses based on the real F1 World Championship, only without the correct names and branding. I didn't have a great time with this one, to be honest, but then I'm not into F1, so your mileage may vary. It got middling reviews. Sega Retro gives it 73% based on 30 reviews. Real sound. Right, here's a real curio for you now. The company Warp and its founder, Kenji Ino, was a legendary developer on the Sega Saturn, responsible for the idiosyncratic and deeply imagined classics D, Enemy Zero, and later on D2. Ino was considered a bit of a maverick auteur until his unfortunate death at just 42 years of age. Anyway, Real Sound Kaze no Regret is an adventure game released in 1997 exclusively in Japan. The game is effectively an audio drama CD with pictures that show up on the screen. It's all in Japanese, of course, but fortunately some cool guy on the Interslice has Google translated the script of the game. It's far from ideal, of course, but hey, you can't have everything, can you? Anyway, I've put this translation on the screen rather clumsily for what it's worth.
何も前世なんて言葉で解決するようなことじゃないのかもしれない。幼い頃、まるでそれが世界のすべてかのように愛した自転車や虫かごや学校の裏山も今では何も思い出せず、遠い霧の向こうに音も立てずに隠れている。けれど記憶喪失の人が自転車の乗り方は忘れないように。
This game was intended to provide equal access to sighted and non-sighted players. The subtitle, Kaze no Regret, means regret of wind, or wind's regret. This game has no graphics whatsoever, other than some nice landscape photographs. The only bit of animation in this game, as far as I could see, were these rather nice VMU clouds drifting by serenely. I really wish this game did have full English subtitling because I'm really intrigued by it and I found it really quite immersive and atmospheric despite not understanding a single word. Maybe someone will translate it one day. Anyway, the game had mediocre sales, but has become something of a collector's item due partly to the cult popularity of Ino's other titles. Further driving the collectability of the game are the variety of feelies included with it. A signature move that Ino had become known for at this point. Included with Real Sound were such oddities as a set of instructions in Braille, a bag of herb seeds, and a transparent box with a cloud motif. Why did he include the seeds? Well, I'll let him explain in a suspiciously Mancunian accent. The main reason for including seeds was that Real Sound is a love story, and it's a game that has a totally different concept from my former games, like horror games, so I wanted people to understand the atmosphere of this one. So I thought that if I included these flower seeds, then that would pass on the image and give the user an idea of what kind of game it was without explaining the story and all that business. That's one of the reasons why I decided to do this. Also, another reason is that I felt like I wanted users to grow and to support the game. This game received positive reviews. It gets 80 according to Sega Retro, based on 3 reviews, and surely it stands as one of the most unique games on Dreamcast, even though it was originally released on the Saturn. So what does that name mean? Well, it means Kitahi, which means to the north, as in let's go north, and White Illumination, the name of a Japanese festival. This is a visual novel / love dating sim type thing. You are a second-year high school student from Tokyo and have decided to head to the north, to the city of Sapporo, for your 2-week summer vacation. The plan is for you to stay with your cousin and her mother, but you'll be meeting many other girls along the way. There's Ayu, who dreams of becoming a musician, Yuko, who serves in the defense force, Kaoru, who interns at a hospital, and the young Megumi Ida, who works on a farm. You better make some friends over your summer vacation, because you'll be returning to Sapporo the following winter for the annual White Illumination Festival, when the snow-covered trees and monuments of Sapporo's Odori Park are lined with millions and millions of lights. Kitahi is somewhat different from a typical love sim like Sakura Wars, say. The game takes place in modern Japan and features actual footage from the Hokkaido area. Most of the game's outdoor shots are actual photographs taken by the Red Company. There is some hand-drawn scenery, but most of the hand-drawn effort is reserved for the characters, which were designed by the Red Company's in-house artist extraordinaire, Noki, or Nochi, or Noki, or Nuki. It's quite pretty, with some very nice high-quality artwork, in, for the time, very high resolution, and also some high-quality FMVs for a game of this vintage. I'm a big fan of Snatcher and Policenauts, and I enjoy visual novel games, if the story's up to scratch, of course. And if this had an English translation, I probably would give it a whirl, based on the visuals and audio design alone, I think, even though it's for girls.
Everybody know it's for girls!
ごめんなさい。いきなりお兄ちゃんなんて呼んでびっくりしましたよね。私、春の小鳥です。お母さんが仕事で急に来れなくなっちゃって、代わりに私が来たんです。
I found it relaxing and absorbing right from the get-go, despite being entirely in Japanese. But sadly, more than that, I cannot really say, as the entire thing is unintelligible to me. Again, this one was received quite positively. It gets a score of 80 based on 3 reviews, according to the good folks at Sega Retro. Former Managing Director Yukawa's Treasure Hunt. This one's absolutely nuts and pointless, and it's very, very Dreamcast. Mr. Yukawa became an overnight success in Japan after starring in a series of amusing and surprisingly honest commercials, where he rises up from the depths of self-doubt and being bullied by PlayStation-loving children to spread the good word of the Dreamcast and lead the fight as the senior managing director of Sega Japan. This relatively brief bout of fame resulted in Yukawa's image being used on Dreamcast console boxes, merchandise, and print adverts. This very simple game was released exclusively in Japan near the Dreamcast launch and was tied into a short-running competition. The game has you play as Yukawa himself, with the aim being to dig up various tiles to complete puzzles that make up images of Dreamcast-related memorabilia. During March 99 and April 99, players could submit their victories online to be entered into a raffle to win real-life Dreamcast goodies, or even 10,000 yen. The servers for this game are down, of course, but the game itself is still fully playable. In fact, it's now available in English, thanks to a team consisting of Snowy Aria, Espinite, and Mr. Nobody, who released the translation patch for it back in April. Now, it's awesome that this game is available in English, of course, and that I have the chance to play it, but I have to say that the game itself is bad. As far as I can tell, you just randomly dig the ground without rhyme or reason in the hope of building up this set of images and answering the question Mr. Yukawa sets for you at the beginning of the game. If you don't have all the parts of that particular image, then you can't actually pick that as your answer when he asks you the question at the end of the game. Yeah, this game was a promo thing and not intended to be anywhere near a full release, but even so, it's very dull.
Would you like to play again? You have selected no.
Blue Stinger, an early big release for the Dreamcast and one that did make it to the West. It's mad, it's camp as Christmas, it's a bit bollocks, but something about this game just draws you in and stays with you. It's ostensibly a survival horror game, but in terms of its aesthetics, it's far from the Resident Evils and Silent Hills of that era. A huge meteorite crashes in the Yucatan Peninsula, beginning the nuclear winter that drives the dinosaurs to extinction and paves the way for mammalian life. 65 million years later, in the year 2001, an island emerges from the depths of the ocean at the impact site and is promptly given the name Dinosaur Island. Believed to be the crater caused by that very same meteorite, a biotech corporation, those little shits again, quickly sets up camp on the island and soon dominates the market. Elliot Ballard, an elite member of the ESER forces, is vacationing off the coast of Dinosaur Island when a strange object falls from the sky, placing all of Dinosaur Island, can you say Dinosaur Island again, under a mysterious dome of energy. Shortly afterwards, Nephilim, a mysterious ghost-like being, begins following Elliot around the monster-infested island. Needless to say, it's up to Elliot to get to the bottom of things and save himself from the monsters lurking within his enigmatic prison. The characters here are immediately likeable in a completely shit and awesome way. I love this absolute cheeseball lead and his big fat fisherman friend, and let's not forget the magnificent and very beautiful Janine Over.
This is Janine Over.
The C-movie voice acting in this game is fucking class. I can't get enough of it.
You must be with Tim.
Tim is
what? Dead?
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know? Is that Acer's answer? You know, Tim once told me he had a high-level Acer member as a friend. Where are you going? To the island?
I am still a rescuer. There are people there who need help.
What a joke. Obviously, you're going to need good help, like me. I can't let a wimp like you go alone.
Whatever.
and the whole thing has the feel of some lost mid-budget 1980s, early 90s special effects fantasy horror type movie. In the best possible way, of course. I can just picture this one with ropey blue screen work and masses of practical effects with big thick matte lines around everything. It's just magical stuff.
It won't work. You can't hit her.
What is that thing?
Nephilim.
Nephilim?
She's harmless. So far. I'm Elliot Balad. Thanks for helping me.
You know, you shouldn't run up your bill at Rat's place. Your name is on their blacklist. You're pretty famous.
God damn son of a bitch.
It's imaginative and it's uncanny. Look at this little section where you come across a little residential district and find it deserted, save for some of these four-armed zombie things. Your only option is to stroll along the thoroughfare, merrily slinging arrows into their faces to the sound of jingle bells and Christmas music. I just get kind of John Carpenter vibes here. It's awesome stuff, it really is. In its review of the game, IGN noted that the availability of virtually unlimited healing supplies and ammo completely removes the survival horror aspect of Resident Evil, removing an interesting psychological component from this game. Well, for me personally, I find those games fucking stressful for that very reason, to be honest, and I actually enjoy Blue Stinger quite a bit more as a result, even though the controls are complete and utter shash. Interestingly, the Western release is really quite different to the original Japanese. The Japanese version of this game had a camera that was considered a major flaw. It used to glide between fixed viewpoints as Elliot traipsed about the scenery, presumably in a more Resident Evil type fashion. In keeping with its tendency to improve imported games, Activision drastically improved the game's camera. Kind of. The camera follows Elliot a la Tomb Raider. While this eliminates a majority of the frustration spawned by the original game's camera, gone is the atmosphere that the previous game's camera angles were able to establish. Additionally, a few of the game's cinematic moments can be missed without the aid of a hand-fed view. Finally, the new camera is still a bit awkward in tight rooms, but this was a relatively minor complaint at the time, more so now. It received middling reviews at the time, but this is another Dreamcast game that has a lot of unique elements going for it in my opinion, where many of those better but more generic games have long lost their luster. This idiosyncratic and imaginative game has a fantastic sense of place, and it's most definitely an interesting and enjoyable, if clunky as hell one, to revisit today. Okay, Flag to Flag. What a nice surprise. I'd never played this one, I'd never even heard of it, to be honest with you, and that's because it didn't actually come out in the UK. To top this all off, it's actually quite good. The graphics have some colourful charm, there's some nice little touches, like the driver wiping the shit off his window here, which doesn't really make sense, but it's nice all the same, and there's a pretty nice sensation of speed, especially when you're in the cockpit view. The physics are a bit weird in my opinion. You can only really turn when braking, and when you do brake, you turn very sharply indeed. You also pretty much stop dead if you so much as glance at the grass at the side of the track, which is quite annoying after a while. It feels a bit awkward to me and it takes some getting used to, but I was starting to get to grips with it after an hour or so.
Gentlemen, start your engines. Round 5. Rio de Janeiro.
There's a nice selection of courses, even though quite a lot of them look kind of the same, and there's also a good selection of different drivers. The whole thing does have a whiff of the cheap about it, but, you know, it's okay. I love the soft rock soundtrack also. They don't make them like this no more. They didn't even make them like that no more at the time, to be fair, but it's awesome all the same. I was kind of surprised to read that this was in fact developed in Japan. It feels more American to me for some reason, but maybe that incredibly unfashionable in the West but still great anyway soundtrack is a bit of a giveaway. This game received 74 on Sega Retro based on 11 reviews. And so we're on to our first 2D fighter on the Dreamcast. There will be many, many more to come. It's the third installment in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, which features characters from Capcom's video game franchise and characters from Marvel Comics. The game debuted in Japanese and North American arcades in '98, and it was ported to the Dreamcast in '99 and the PlayStation in 2000. Jesus Christ, this game is bright and flashy. I needed a pair of fucking shades to play this one. If you aren't epileptic, then I think it could probably introduce you to it. I don't even know what the fuck's going on, but it's awesome.
Level 1! Web ball! Danger!
Get ready, Connor.
Danger!
See ya.
Web swing! Web swing! Maximum level!
Get ready, Connor. Danger!
Web swing! Web swing! Web swing! Web swing! Web swing! Web swing!
Spider-Man wins!
What's immediately apparent to me is the sprite art in this game. It's incredible. The late 90s was surely the high watermark of 2D graphics. Just look at this thing. And I don't know about you, but I found it 100 times more interesting to look at than the new Street Fighter games, for example. This is an awesome looking fighter. The Dreamcast controller is no good for this kind of thing. Its D-pad is quite poor, and the layouts are all wrong. I used to have the Green Goblin, otherwise known as the Agitech arcade stick for the Dreamcast, which was really nice, but I needed the cash a couple of years ago, and so I sold it. Instead, I'm playing this one with my Sega Saturn controller, courtesy of this clever little Mayflash adapter. So, what's the game like? Well, it's extremely good fun, but Jesus, this game is exhausting, both visually and in gameplay terms. The knuckle of my thumb was ground down to a fine paste within minutes of starting this game. It fucking kills your joints. But yes, it is awesome. All I really did was spam quarter moon shapes on the D-pad for about an hour solid, but I still had a damn good time doing it. Oh, it's just filthy, isn't it, really?
Ready. Fight! First attack! Good! Level 1! Good!
With swing! With swing! Sting! With
level 1!
With ball! With swing!
Level 2!
With ball! Shoot!
I'm not into Marvel, to be honest, and I'm not particularly into Capcom either, although I'm a good deal more into that than I am the Marvel, but that's a highly subjective thing again. I can only try and look at its relative merits. It's a great game, in my opinion, but if anyone says this doesn't devolve fairly quickly into a bit of a mash fest, I would disagree with them. The whole thing is a bit too mental for me when it comes to 2D fighters. I prefer something along the Street Fighter Alpha or the Last Blade series, something like that. But my god, this game is just a tour de force. Look at this thing in motion. It's insane. So, with that, we have reached the end of part 2 of 4691 in our Dreamquest. And I don't know about you, but this is already deepening my appreciation for this brave, powerful, innovative, quixotic little white box. There are so many little Dreamcast gems left in Japan. The titles that did arrive in the West were heavily skewed towards arcade and action, and many of those were absolutely brilliant, of course. But looking through the Japanese library, there were so many RPGs, puzzle games, and visual novels that were denied to us. I mean, let's be honest, they never would have sold over here anyway. Even at this early stage of the Dreamquest, I'm starting to see just how broad and varied the Dreamcast library really was. Maybe one day the fine folks who invest their time, energy and love into translating these things will make the rest of them available to us. I will certainly enjoy playing them. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in part 3 ASAP. If you have enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below, and please remember...
Hey!